Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle, and this is another video in my Agatha Christie read-through project. For those of you who don't know, I've been reading through Agatha Christie's work in publication order, and I've had a few things that I've been keeping in mind as I go. One, I'm just reading them for fun because I love Agatha Christie. Two, I've been keeping my eye out for certain things because I'm reading them in publication order just to see what I can see about how her writing progresses, and how I'm also really curious to see how the books are connected. What I'm really interested in is kind of mapping out an Agatha Christie universe. So I keep my eye open for that when I'm reading the books. I look for connections between characters, especially the main characters in her different books. And I also just keep my eye out for kind of how she plots her mysteries, because she is so good at that. So I keep my eye on that. I look for the clues and kind of where she hides clues and all of that stuff. So in today's video, I have for you a Tommy and Tuppence, a Poirot, and a Miss Marple. So like I said, I'm reading these in publication order, and so these are the three that came up. And first up we have a Tommy and Tuppence. Now I will be keeping my eye on this book. This is the notebook that I keep for my read-through project. So if you see me looking down, I'm looking at the notebook. First up, the next up that I read was N or M. And this is from 1941. This is the third Tommy and Tuppence that she wrote. And I find, one thing I find very interesting about Tommy and Tuppence, as opposed to Poirot and Miss Marple, is that they age appropriately. So in the very first book that she wrote in the 20s, they were in their early 20s themselves. And now this book is from 1941, and they are 46. So they age appropriately. Now, Agatha Christie only wrote a few Tommy and Tuppence, maybe 5 or 6, and the last one that she wrote, they're senior citizens. And so I do really like that about the Tommy and Tuppence books. Whereas the Poirot books, he seems kind of almost ageless. We know that he had retired from the police force when he came over, so he was probably already in his 40s. We don't really know, but he doesn't really seem to age. He just kind of, otherwise by the end he would have been like 102 or something. Okay, anyway, back to N or M. What I'm going to do is give a kind of a brief synopsis and, you know, what I thought of the book, and then I'm going to get into some details, and so I'll put spoiler across the screen. If you haven't read it, that might be a good point to stop watching. I may not spoil anything, but I want to feel free to say whatever I want to say without spoiling things for people. So in this book, Tommy and Tuppence are approached by who approaches them now? I forget. Somebody, and he really just wants to talk to Tommy. And so Tuppence leaves the room. She says she's going to go see a friend or whatever. They're at their apartment. And this man who had worked with Tommy in the past in some kind of Secret Service department tells Tommy that one of their agents had died, and he was looking for fifth columnists. This is a book that's set in 1942 and is actually in the middle of the war. They talk about the war and how Tommy had wanted to really be more involved in the war. And so anyway, one of their agents had died. He was hit by a car, I believe. And the last words that he said were N or M song Susie. And they were, you know, a little bit confused by that. They knew that N and M were names for enemy agents, and so they know that that's something to do with the message, but the rest of the message was a little bit confusing, and they want Tommy to investigate, to find out what the message meant, and to find these fifth columnists, these enemy agents in Britain. And so Tommy goes to a guest house in Lexhampton where they kind of know it all started there. And the story goes from there. I actually really enjoyed this Tommy and Tuppence. I loved that it was during World War II, and there was spy stuff involved, and yet there was kind of this sense of almost a closed circle because they were looking really closely at the other guests at this guest house. So it was this small group of people who they think were possibilities for who is N or M. I love the way that Tommy and Tuppence work together in these books, and I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was solidly plotted, it was really interesting, and it had a great solution. I liked where Agatha Christie went with her solution, and that's all I'm going to say before I get spoilery. I did this as a buddy read with Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf, and it was really fun to talk about this book with her as we read. We were kind of, giving our theories at the time as we read through the book, and so it was really, really fun to read it with her. Okay, spoiler time, because I'm going to get into some stuff here, and some of it may not be spoilery, but everybody has a different idea of what is spoilery. So let's just get right into this. First of all, I loved the opening paragraphs of this book. It was a great reveal of the time period, that it was World War II. And so I'm just going to read that for you. Tommy Beresford removed his overcoat in the hall of the flat. He hung it up with some care, taking time over it. His hat went carefully on the next peg. He squared his shoulders, affixed a resolute smile to his face, and walked into the sitting room where his wife sat, knitting a balaclava helmet in khaki wool. I love that she's knitting a balaclava instead of socks. I mean, that was so common for women of the time during World War II to knit socks for the soldiers. I love that she's knitting a balaclava. That right there tells you something about her own character. I loved that. I love also that the reveal that Tuppence is already at the guest house when Tommy gets there at the end of chapter 1. It is such a great reveal because she is not supposed to know. She thinks that he is in Scotland, that he has been sent up to Scotland to do something boring for the war work, and he doesn't realize that she is smarter than that and has figured out what was going on. And so this reveal at the end of chapter 1 is so good. Tommy held his breath. The room spun around. Mrs. Blenkinsop? Tuppence? By all that was impossible and unbelievable. Tuppence, calmly knitting in the lounge of Sans Souci. Her eyes met his, polite, uninterested stranger's eyes. His admiration rose. Tuppence. I love that. And I also love that they really do have an equal partnership in these books. And especially for the time period, I love that it's not just Tommy does the bulk of the work and Tuppence just like plods along or follows along or does the typing. They really do have this equal partnership. And so we get a good view of it from here. Tommy is talking to his handler or whatever, and the handler says, "She's in on it whether we like it or not. Tell her the department will esteem it an honor if she will condescend to work with us over the matter." And then a little bit later, Tommy's response to Grant's suggestion that he persuade Tuppence to bow out. And Tommy said slowly, "I don't know that I really would want to do that. Tuppence and I, you see, aren't on those terms. We go into things together." I loved that. I love that Albert is back in this. He helps them out. He's a character from the first Tommy and Tuppence and the second Tommy and Tuppence. So I love that Agatha Christie brought him back for this one. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this, and I thought that Agatha Christie made a really bold choice in making Mrs. Sprout M, the female enemy agent. Yeah, I just thought it was good. I really did enjoy this one. Okay, and then next up was The Body in the Library from 1942. This is a Miss Marple. It is the third Miss Marple, I want to say. It's a Miss Marple set in St. Mary Mead, and I loved that. We get Colonel Melchett back again, and we met him in Murder at the Vicarage, and Inspector Slack. We also met him at Murder at the Vicarage. We get Sir Henry Clithering, who is also a great character. Now this one, however, is not set 100% in St. Mary Mead. It kind of moves, the action moves between St. Mary Mead and a hotel in a nearby town, a seaside hotel in a nearby town. And so you kind of move back and forth between the two locations, and I do really like that about the story. In this story, Colonel Bantry and Dolly Bantry, who are friends of Miss Marple, they live in the big house in the village, and they wake up one morning to discover that there is a body in their library. And they don't know who it is, so they have to call the police. They are very confused about who this body is in their library. And once they discover who the body is, that's what takes them to this hotel, the Majestic, in the other town, because she worked as a dance host at that hotel. And so the action moves back and forth between the two. I loved this one. I gave it 5 stars. I really loved it. I thought it was very well plotted. The story was interesting. The characters were interesting. You got a lot of Miss Marple, which I love in a Miss Marple story. Sometimes she doesn't really kind of show up until towards the end, or she doesn't have a huge role, but she really did in this one. Okay, now I'm gonna put spoiler across the screen because I don't want to wreck anything for anybody if you haven't read this one yet. But let's get into some details in this one. First of all, I absolutely loved the opening chapter of this book, of the Bantrys finding a body in the library. I just think it was a brilliant opening chapter. I really loved it. Dolly Bantry is a great character. She says, "Oh, I don't want comfort, but you're so good at bodies." So she calls Miss Marple. Her husband thinks it's because she needs the comfort of another woman because they found a body in their library. It's not to do with that at all. It's because she is loving the fact that there is a mystery to solve, and she knows that Miss Marple is good at it. So she calls Miss Marple to come and see and get involved. So when Dolly Bantry is asking Jane Marple to come, and the reason why, she says to her, "But you're very good at murders. She's been murdered, you see, strangled. What I feel is that if one has got to have a murder actually happening in one's house, one might as well enjoy it, if you know what I mean. That's why I want you to come and help me find out who did it and unravel the mystery and all that. It really is rather thrilling, isn't it?" So that was fun. Now, we got a really good peek at Marple's investigative methods in this book, as compared to Poirot's. I like to look at that too in this read-through project. I've been really looking at Marple's investigative methods as opposed to Poirot's investigative methods. And we find on chapter 19 there's a really good quote about how she investigates. "For Miss Marple had attained fame by her ability to link up trivial village happenings with graver problems in such a way as to throw light upon the matter." That totally right there kind of encapsulates her investigative methods. How does she do it? She links up you know, what she knows about village life and trivial things that have happened in the village, how people have behaved. She links it up with greater things, with things that happen in murders, in mysteries. And I love that about Miss Marple, because it suits her. It suits her age and the type of person she is. So she's an older woman. She's probably in her early 70s. We don't really know. But she's a Victorian, right? Like she grew up in that Victorian era. So this type of investigating really does suit her personality and her age. Okay, we're gonna get back to her investigative methods in a second here. But as I was reading chapter 1, I realized that the phrase "body in the library" or something very similar to that kept popping up in the first chapter. So I started to count it, and the phrase "body in the library" happens 9 times in the first chapter. So no question that there is something happening and that a body has been found in their library. And I like how often it happens in chapter 1, because it really highlights the unusualness of it, that it's someone that they don't know. How weird is it that there is a body in the library? And that all is really highlighted by how often it's repeated in that chapter. Another thing, I love it when Agatha Christie name drops in her books, especially herself. And she does it in this one, and it is so cheeky. I love it. So they're at the Majestic, and there's a boy, the son of one of the characters involved, and he says, "Do you like detective stories? I do. I read them all, and I've got autographs from Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie and Dixon Carr and H.C. Bailey. Will the murder be in the papers?" I loved it. I loved it so much. And then we have Sir Henry Clithering, who gives a description of Miss Marple. He is talking to Mr. Jefferson, who is one of the characters that we meet at the hotel that's really involved in this story. And Sir Henry says this about Miss Marple. "Downstairs in the lounge, by the 3rd pillar from the left, there sits an old lady with a sweet, placid, spinsterish face and a mind that has plumbed the depths of human iniquity and taken it as all in a day's work. Her name's Miss Marple. She comes from the village of St. Mary Mead, which is 1.5 miles from Gossington. She's a friend of the Bantrys, and where crime is concerned, she's the goods, Conway." Such a good description. I love it so much. Okay, so some more about her methods of detection, her investigative methods. 1, she uses specialized knowledge, and that's highlighted again in this book, where they talk about how she has specialized knowledge of crime, of human nature, that's how she does her work. The other thing is, again, these parallels from village life, and we see that highlighted again. And this is Clithering again, who is saying, "Miss Marple has an interesting, though occasionally trivial, series of parallels from village life." And then she also uses her knowledge of human nature to help her investigate. And this is highlighted 3 different times in The Body in the Library. First, Miss Marple shook her head sadly. "Human nature is very much the same anywhere, Sir Henry," she said. And then later, again, this is Miss Marple, "But I had to explain to you, and if you care, I'll give you a hint. The trouble in this case is that everybody has been much too credulous and believing. You simply cannot afford to believe everything that people tell you. When there's anything fishy about, I never believe anyone at all. You see, I know human nature so well." And then one more time. again, it's Miss Marple. As I've told you, I've got a very suspicious mind. My nephew Raymond tells me, in fun of course, that I have a mind like a sink. He says that most Victorians have. All I can say is that the Victorians knew a good deal about human nature. Okay, and then as I was reading through, I picked up on, and I don't write these down, all of them down, but I picked up on this one to a big clue. First of all, on page 19, when Miss Marple first sees the body when Dolly Bantry invites her over, and this is a perfect example, I think, of how Agatha Christie buries her clues in a paragraph. So that what is the important thing isn't what you think it is in the paragraph. So she says, "No," said Miss Marple thoughtfully, "and I can't say that it does, not at the moment. I was reminded a little of Mrs. Chetty's youngest, Edie, you know, but I think that was just because this poor girl bit her nails and her front teeth stuck out a little. Nothing more than that. And of course," went on Miss Marple, pursuing the parallel further, "Edie was fond of what I call cheap finery too." So then they go on to talk about the dress that the girl is wearing and how it is poor quality. It's not a really good dress. So buried in that paragraph was a very important clue, and that was that the girl bit her nails. And yeah, you can see when I read that how that's so easily lost in everything else that you're finding out. And then later in the book, we get this. It's the little boy again. He says, "See, it's a fingernail. Her fingernail. I'm going to label it fingernail of the murdered woman and take it back to school. It's a good souvenir, don't you think?" "Where did you get it?" asked Miss Marple. "Well, it was a bit of luck, really, because of course I didn't know she was going to be murdered then. It was before dinner last night. Ruby caught her nail in Josie's shawl and it tore. Mums cut it off for her and gave it to me and said put it in the paper basket, and I meant to, but I put it in my pocket instead, and this morning I remembered and looked to see if it was there, and it was, so now I've got it as a souvenir." And that right there is where you figure out that it's such a massive clue, because, and this is what's so great about the body in the library, is the body is identified as Ruby. And everybody is investigating based on the fact that it's Ruby that's the body in the library. And Miss Marple is the one who figures out that it's not, that it's a different girl. And the girl that was in the library, her nails had been bitten. So it couldn't have been Ruby, because Ruby tore her fingernail in the shawl. And you can't tear your long nails when you bite them. You don't have long nails. So that's, it was a great clue, and I loved how it was buried and in the story. There is a Shakespeare quote in here. One thing I've discovered as I was doing my read through is that Agatha Christie does seem to really enjoy quoting Shakespeare in her books. And I don't catch all of it because I don't know enough about Shakespeare, but this one was easy. "I am aware," said Miss Marple, "that it isn't what you call orthodox, but it is so important, isn't it, to be quite sure, to make assurance doubly sure, as Shakespeare has it. I think if Mr. Jefferson would agree." So there you go. And then the other thing that I've been keeping my eye out, and especially the differences between Marple and Poirot. And I've been discovering that for Poirot, it's truth, that what's important to him is the truth. For Miss Marple, what's important for her is justice. And that comes out again in this at the very end. They're talking about the murderer, and they've we're wrapping up here, and she's talking about him and how he did it, and then she says, "Really, I feel quite pleased to think of him hanging." And then she continues on talking about how the murderer did it. And that right there is further proof that justice is important to Marple. And so that's the body in the library. And then the third one that I read was Five Little Pigs, and this is from 1942, and this is a Poirot. What's interesting about this one is that it is a cold case. The daughter of a convicted murderer comes to Poirot and asks him to look further into the case because she believes her mother was innocent. And the events took place 16 years before. So Poirot needs to figure out a case that had happened 16 years beforehand. And I do enjoy that story, that added difficulty for Poirot in trying to figure out what had happened. The girl's father was the man who was killed 16 years ago, and her mother was tried and convicted of that murder. They are now both dead, and Poirot has 5 little pigs that he can investigate, 5 people that were involved that he can talk to about the case. And so yeah, I really enjoyed this one as well. It was very much talky because all he could really do was speak to the people involved to try and figure out what had really happened. But I did quite enjoy this one as well. Right at the beginning, Poirot says to the girl, "I will investigate your case of murder. I will search back into the events of 16 years ago, and I will find out the truth." So again, right from the beginning, we get that importance for Poirot of finding the truth. So, who are the 5 little pigs that he can investigate? He talks about that rhyme. You know, this little piggy went to market, this little piggy came home. So they are Philip Blake, who is the best friend of the man who was killed, Amias. Meredith Blake is Philip's brother. Elsa Greer is Amias's girlfriend. He is a painter. He was painting her, and he was also having an affair with her. And this was all happening at his own home, and his wife was there. The fourth is the governess of his wife's sister, who was, I think, 14 or something. Her name was Miss Williams. And then Carolyn's half-sister, Angela Warren. And those were the 5 people that Poirot spoke to in order to discover the truth of what actually happened 16 years ago. Okay, let's go ahead and get spoilery here and get into some details. Again, there's another quote on page 32. Poirot says, "One can enjoy the pursuit of truth for its own sake. I do." Again, further proof that he is about truth. He says, on page 51, he says, "Actually, I am a detective." The modesty of this remark had probably not been equaled before in Poirot's conversation. The fact that all he says is, "I am a detective," that's brilliant. Okay, I also like looking for the connections, like I said before, between the books, characters that pop up again, and we have one in Five Little Pigs, Lady Mary Linton Gore. Now, she was a character from 3-Act Tragedy from 1935. She was the mother of Egg, if you've read that book, and she knows Meredith Blake, so she agrees to write a letter of introduction for Poirot to Meredith Blake. And so I do really enjoy when I find these connections between the books. It helps as we build this universe to know that everybody is, you know, they're all in the same universe. Another interesting quote that I marked, Poirot is speaking to Meredith Blake here, and he says, "Have you ever reflected, Mr. Blake, that the reason for murder is nearly always to be found in a study of the person murdered?" Interesting. Again, there was a Shakespeare reference on page 91. There was a reference to Romeo and Juliet, specifically Juliet. Was it not an essential part of Juliet's makeup that she should die young? And then there were 2 more references to Juliet. A few pages later, there is another reference. This time, Elsa Greer is the one who brings it up. And then a few pages after that, Poirot again brings up this Shakespeare reference of Juliet, and especially about Juliet dying young. I really enjoyed that chapters 7, 8, and 9 in this book were the narratives that Philip, Meredith, Elsa, Miss Williams, and Angela wrote for Poirot about their recollections of what happened 16 years ago. He asked all of them to write down what they remembered. Not necessarily what they told the police, but what they remembered of what happened in the days just before, and conversations that they had, all of that. He wanted all of that information, and so they wrote it down, and chapters 7, 8, and 9 are the narratives that they wrote for Poirot, and so we got to read those. I thought that was an interesting way to do it, to get that information. I also was picking up on the fact, there were some clues that I was picking up on, that Amias was maybe poisoned earlier than everybody had assumed that he was. First of all, he says nothing tastes right, or everything tastes foul, or something like that, after sipping the beer. And it made me wonder if he had already been poisoned, and that's why the beer tasted funny. So that was this was me trying to figure out the answer. Was maybe he was poisoned earlier than everybody had assumed, that everyone had assumed that it was his beer that was poisoned. He staggered a bit in Philip's narrative, and he talked about him doing that before he drank the beer, which was another clue that maybe it was earlier. And then right at the end, towards the end of the book, Poirot says, and this is a final quote about the truth, "I accepted that commission. I set to work to find out the truth." So there you have it. That is Five Little Pigs. I did really enjoy this one, and I thought that it was very interesting. Elsa Greer is the murderer, and at the end Poirot finds that out, and he gives enough detail so that the daughter who wanted the truth, because she wants to get married and she doesn't want this hanging over her that her mother was a murderer, and it was enough for her and for her fiance. But Poirot's conversation with Elsa at the end, again, like, Agatha Christie writes such great murderers. Elsa was so cold, and she did what she did to get what she wanted, because someone did something that she didn't like. And I do like that Agatha Christie is willing to write these cold murderers. And towards the end, we don't get justice, we do get the truth at the end of this one. And Poirot, although Poirot does say that he will do what he can to get the word out to tell the people who need to know what he discovered. But of course, this case is over. Someone was already imprisoned for it and is dead. And it's doubtful that anything will ever actually happen, justice-wise, for Elsa. But the truth has been found, and the truth is known, and that's what's important to Poirot. So these are the three that I have read the most recently in my Agatha Christie read-through project: N or M, The Body in the Library, and Five Little Pigs. Have you read any of these three books? I would love to chat with you about them in the comment section down below. Find out your thoughts on those three stories, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.